Welcome to the Fertility Mind podcast. I am your host, Jessica Friesen, a certified fertility mindset coach, a sound healer, and an international best-selling author. My mission for this podcast is to give you weekly episodes where you hear my own success with IVF and how mindset and manifestation changed it all for me. You will also hear from my guests who share their success stories in the fertility world. I want you to know that you are not alone. Even when things feel tough and when things feel like they aren't going your way, the tools and techniques you will get in this podcast, I know can change everything for you too. So thanks for being here with me today, and let's dive in. Hello and welcome back to another episode. I have a special guest here with me today, Michelle Kapler. We go way back. We've known each other since high school, and Michelle actually did acupuncture on me in 2014 when I had started my very first IVF journey. So Michelle, take it away and introduce yourself and let us know what you're up to.
Hello. It is such a fun full circle moment for us to both be here and thinking back to high school and knowing each other, and then, getting to be a small piece of your fertility journey, and then to see your kids on Facebook and everybody growing up and being happy and healthy. It's just so amazing. So thank you for having me. Just to introduce myself, I'm Michelle Kapler, and I'm a registered acupuncturist and Chinese medicine practitioner. And I'm also a master certified life coach. So my clinical practice and coaching are exclusively focused in the area of reproductive health, which means I've helped a lot of people using fertility treatments to build their families with acupuncture and Chinese medicine. And I also help people get relief from the inevitable stress and anxiety that come with infertility through my coaching practice.
That's amazing. And it has honestly been such a beautiful thing to, like, how we were just talking about social media before we started this, how you get to see people's lives unfolding, even though you're not necessarily in the same city or get to talk every single day. So yeah, it is really cool that we get to connect again this way. So would you explain a little bit about like your take on fertility and how you can help people through their journey and just kind of different options that are available to them?
Sure, of course. So I'm happy to talk specifically about what I offer people. As within any profession, there's going to be different practitioners, different doctors are going to have different approaches, which again, we're very familiar with in the context of infertility too, because even if you see a different doctor at the same clinic, even they might have a different treatment plan. So just to put that caveat out there. And I also want to give my usual rant about treatment choices that I always talk about, which is that there is no hierarchy of treatment options. One is not better than the other. There are all types of people who need care who will come to the table with all sorts of values and priorities. So, for example, talking about fertility treatment, if you tell your friend that you're using, let's say, IVF and medications, and they tell you directly or indirectly that your choice is inferior or inappropriate because it's not, quote unquote, the natural route, know that one method is not better than the other. And conversely, if you want to try some alternative stuff, that's fine too. There's no right way to do this. Different bodies will have different needs, and there's going to be varying levels of accessibility and options for people. And most of the time, it's honestly just about trying a bunch of things and seeing what works. And in many cases, it ends up being a combination of a few things that ultimately provides a solution, or maybe just a step in the right direction. And also, I want to say that I always recommend consulting with a licensed and qualified and experienced practitioner for all of your treatment recommendations. So it might be a medical doctor or functional medicine practitioner or a naturopath or another allied health professional like a registered acupuncturist like me. Everybody's different, and it is going to require an individualized assessment to determine the right solution for your unique and individual needs. So with that being said, I'm going to give a generalized overview of how acupuncture applies in the context of fertility. So there's kind of two buckets in which I look at treatment plan. So the first one is that if somebody comes to see me and they're not doing fertility treatments, and I'm essentially being their primary care provider, there's definitely a more holistic view that we take to things because I consider myself kind of their primary line of treatment. So we're looking at improving egg quality, we're looking at balancing hormones, we're looking at the mind-body piece. If somebody has a particular condition that is keeping them from getting pregnant, that could benefit from using dietary changes or lifestyle practices, we focus on that as well. But I think what's most interesting to people, which I'll talk about now, is how I would help you in the context of actually being a fertility clinic patient. So a question that often comes up is acupuncture safe to use while I'm doing IVF for IUI or using medications or, anything like that? And yes, it is. It is safe. But again, that's why I recommend seeing somebody who is, has a lot of experience working with fertility patients, because you want to talk to somebody who knows the language, like what medications you're on, how they might interfere with the treatments that you're getting from your acupuncturist, and all of that stuff. You just want that to be a no-brainer for you. You don't even want to have to think about, well, is their treatment plan going to interfere negatively with what I'm doing? So that's the first thing. And then to talk about the actual treatment objectives in an acupuncture context plus IVF or IUI. We're not your primary healthcare provider in that situation. So we're looking to be more of a supportive role. And there's 3 ways that we do this. The first one is that we're aiming to improve pelvic blood flow to the area. And what this does is a whole bunch of things. First of all, if you think about extra circulation to your developing follicles, your ovaries, you're going to get more oxygen, you're going to get more nutrients, you're going to get a better detox situation to help those eggs and follicles grow. And then you're also considering uterine lining. So the more blood flow we can get to the area, the better equipped you're going to be to grow a perfect, gushy, amazing lining for your embryo to land in. And then the second thing that we look to address as being a supportive practitioner, let's say if somebody's doing an IVF cycle, is that nervous system piece. So nervous system regulation is something that I think is being talked about quite a bit these days, and seeing as an important piece of a holistic view of health is looking at how is the nervous system doing in your body, how is your mind reacting to the nervous system. And acupuncture is a really interesting therapy when it comes to nervous system regulation. So as you may know, there's a lot of practices and therapies and approaches that people can take to managing their mind and their nervous system. So things like meditation or mindfulness or particular forms of exercise or therapy or group endeavors to look at the mindset piece of things. But the thing is that all of that, while very effective for regulating the nervous system, actually requires effort on the part of the person. Like they have to show up and be consistent and do the practice to get the results that they're looking for. But the nice thing about acupuncture is that it regulates the nervous system in a passive way. So the person can just show up and lay on the table, the acupuncturist does their treatment, and 20 minutes later, they're in a totally different space with their nervous system, and they haven't had to expend any effort at all. So that's the second thing that I talk about as a clinical objective. And then the third thing is just symptom management. So as we know, different people will have a lot of different types of reactions to the various medications and procedures that are involved with a fertility clinic experience. And so if somebody comes in, let's say they're on Gonal-F as a ovarian stimulating medication, it's giving them hot flashes and headaches and mood swings, we can treat that with acupuncture. If they're having insomnia, we can treat that with acupuncture. So anything that comes up on a day-to-day basis, and that might change from week to week, can also be addressed by a qualified health practitioner.
I think that's incredible. Excuse me. Because I just honestly, like everyone's medical protocol is so very different, and truly how people respond to medications is very different as well. I know that even in my first journey versus my second journey, where I had to have a second egg retrieval, medicine had changed very differently from 2014 to 2019. And my body's reaction was very different to it as well. And I think I loved acupuncture when I got to do it with you. And I know it honestly helped me relax, and I really enjoyed it. And I know there's so many other things that you can do. Can you talk about other services that you offer as well, besides just acupuncture, to help in the IVF world or fertility world?
Yeah, of course. So I would say that acupuncture is the one that most people feel comfortable using and most doctors feel comfortable recommending at this point. And it's interesting to kind of reflect, even 10 years ago, doctors weren't necessarily on board, or patients were having to advocate a lot more to have that as part of their treatment plan. But we're in a place right now where acupuncture combined with fertility treatments is very well researched, and most doctors feel very confident, not necessarily recommending, because a lot of the times a doctor won't feel comfortable recommending something that they don't know about intimately from an expert perspective, but they can look at the research and at least say, yeah, we know it's not harmful. We know that it's not going to mess up the medications that I'm giving you. So if you feel like it's good, yes, go ahead and do it. And that's even that in and of itself is huge. There are other therapies that people can choose to use. I mean, there's such a wide variety of options. In my particular practice, I do work with folks with Chinese herbal formulas as well. Um, Doctors tend to be a little bit more cautious to allow their patients or recommend that their patients include this. Usually, and for good reason, we don't want to add too many things to the pot that we're using in terms of approaches. It's really important, especially if it's your first round of an IVF cycle or even just being on medication, that we're able to control for all of the variables that are contributing to the outcome that we're getting. So using herbs might be an absolute no for a doctor because they don't know how the herbs are going to interact with the medications. They don't know if what they're doing is working or what the acupuncturist is doing is working. And so typically people who use herbs in conjunction with their IVF cycles tend to be people who have kind of tried everything, who have done multiple cycles, and their doctors just aren't getting any answers. And they're like, okay, well, I'm out of answers, so try whatever you want. And then we can add herbs too. Another thing that we can do is a preparation of sorts leading up to IVF. That's when a lot of people kind of come to me thinking, okay, I know that Chinese medicine works, but I'm going to need to use it for a while in order to get optimal results. And so they'll come and be on herbs and get acupuncture for a couple of months leading up to that IVF cycle. So that's another option as well. I don't tend to lean too heavily into dietary adjustment these days. I think there's a lot of pressure and healthism and diet culture that really surrounds all of that in the fertility space. So unless I see a very clear clinical pattern that has to do with, let's say, blood sugar, for example, that might be something that's included in PCOS. I might talk about a particular diet that somebody might be on, but otherwise I usually just tell people, yep, eat a Mediterranean diet, do the best you can, whole foods, that kind of thing. But I don't tend to go down that route too much. And then there's also the mindset, the whole talking about all the feelings and thoughts that tend to come up. And I feel like that's one of the biggest honors of my professional journey, is getting to have the privilege to go on such a personal and deep and intimate and existential journey with somebody and hold space for all of that. So that's another thing that I offer in my clinical practice.
That's beautiful. For someone myself that has studied mindset, and I knew nothing really mindset when I started my first journey, I think it would be an amazing to have you as a partner on my team if I were to do it again, which I'm not. But
I'm done. No more.
honestly, I would love to have many more children, but I have three stepdaughters and I've got three of my own kids, so we've got a full house.
Nice.
And it just we're now getting to the stage where, like, I've got my oldest stepdaughter is in her second year of university and my youngest is two. So you start to have that big age difference where you think, okay, maybe having more isn't the right thing for me. But for any of the listeners, I think you'd be an amazing asset for anyone. Because I know for someone myself that's gone through an IVF journey, and I know, again, everyone is so different how they internalize it, how they feel about it. Um, there was just mindset was such a pivotal thing for me in my secondary journey because I had studied mindset and I started really understanding my thoughts and my patterns. But in 2014, when I didn't really know much about mindset, I put so much pressure on myself. And because my husband already had three children, I was like, okay, there's something wrong with me. And, I really was like, it felt like I did something wrong and I felt like I didn't deserve to have kids. There was a whole slew of things that kind of went on. And as I started realizing like my thoughts and things like that, I was like, it would have been amazing to have someone like just coaching you through and being like, be aware of your thoughts, be aware of you are. And like, there is literally nothing wrong with you. This is just something that's happening right now. And yeah, so I think it's incredible. So what else would you like to share with our listeners about, because I know there's lots of different things in the fertility world. Like there's some very current fertility doctors that are very open to natural medicine. There's some more old school doctors that are just like, no, like this is what you have to do. How do you combat that with your patients that like they really want your services, but their doctor's saying, no, like you just have to do this strict medication? How would you deal with that? How would you counsel them, I guess?
I would say I mean, that's a big question. And the advice that I usually like to give people is, well, first, I will state that a person's relationship with their physician is going to be highly individual. At this point in time, I'm 12 years into my career as a clinician and practicing in the greater Toronto area for over 10 years. I've seen thousands of patients from different fertility clinics that are seeing different doctors and having different experiences. And one thing that I've noticed is that it's a very highly individual reaction to a clinician's bedside manner and method. So I would have one person come in the morning in clinic and say, I've seen Dr. X. I think that they are amazing. And I love that they're so steeped in the science and they're really clear and they're making it really easy for me to make decisions because they're so clear and explain everything really well. And I just know that they're going to help me get pregnant. And I would have somebody else come in the very same day and say, I don't know if I can swear on the podcast. They would go, F Dr. X. It would be the exact same doctor. I think she's terrible. She's so cold and unfeeling. And all she wants to do is talk about the science. And so it's really interesting to observe that a person's experience of a particular physician really comes down to their thoughts about that physician and their expectations for whatever they want to get out of the treatment experience. And so what I would say is that, and again, with the caveat that I recognize that people will have varying levels of accessibility and resources when it comes to doing this type of thing. But just from the context of practicing in a place where there are multiple options, if you are having an experience with your doctor that doesn't really align with what your expectations are, it is your right to seek a second opinion or to ask for a different experience. And I know that that's something that's really difficult when you're a person who's socialized as a woman, because when you're socialized as a woman, you're taught from a very young age that you shouldn't be too loud, too emotional, too inconvenient, don't take up too much space, don't hurt other people's feelings, put everybody else ahead of you, and don't be annoying. Don't, inconvenience somebody. And so those are all the themes that come up, and that's deep conditioning. But yet we're in this context where, at least in Ontario, unless you have that first OHIP funded cycle, and even then there's still a lot of, expenses that come along, even if the procedure's covered, you're in a context where you are paying thousands of dollars to have this medical experience. And so of course, you want to make sure that the experience that you're getting is something that you want. So to go back to your original question, if somebody is going to a doctor that's saying, yeah, I'm very protocol based, I'm just going to tell you exactly what I think, and I'm going to take all of the guesswork out of this, some people might really want that kind of experience. But if you're finding yourself in a place where you're just not getting the experience that you're wanting, then it is your right to ask for a second opinion or a referral or to talk to somebody else. And it's perfectly okay to interview different doctors and find somebody that you feel is a good match and is going to give you what you want. Because there's actually really interesting research that shows, and I can't quote the exact study, I'm very sorry, I might be able to look it up and send it to you later, but there was a study done, actually there's probably been lots of research done on this, and just in the context of medicine itself, but placebo effect is a very powerful thing. If you are on board with what your doctor is suggesting and you have faith that they can get you the results that you're looking for, it makes a huge difference in your clinical outcomes. So if you're showing up to your meeting and your treatment plan with this particular doctor that you're like, they don't give me the time of day, they're not interested in what I have to say, they're not letting me speak, I don't feel like I'm part of the decision-making process, and I think that's going to negatively impact my outcomes. Even if you're just thinking that can negatively impact your outcomes. So that's just really good to know. So of course we come face to face with all of that conditioning of, well, I don't want to bother my doctor and I don't want to offend them. It's okay to recognize that that's coming up and that's where it's coming from, but also it is your right to advocate for the experience that you want.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's very important for women to advocate for themselves. And I can say from my very first journey to my secondary journey, my first journey, I went in knowing nothing in the fertility world, basic science, high school, like you don't have sex or you'll get pregnant. Then you're smack dab in the fertility world and you're like, okay,
Isn't
it's
that
not
such
working.
a disservice that we do to people that we're socializing as girls? It's like the only thing we tell them is don't have sex so you'll get pregnant. You can get
Mhm.
pregnant just by looking at a person with a penis. You can get pregnant at any time in your cycle, and it's just not true. I think it's a
Yes.
real disservice. I mean, that comes from all sorts of historical realities and religious conditioning that isn't super applicable to most people now, but it's interesting to observe that, like, I think that newer generations, it's changing for them, where we're talking about consent and relationships and actually teaching our people socialized girls how their body works.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, our generation, not so much.
Well, yeah, like honestly, like it was, I could go on and on forever about that topic, but now in science class and in health class, they are talking more about IVF. My teenage daughters are telling me a little bit more about it. I'm like, okay, because IVF was never anything that was ever talked about in high school, when we were there, and not to age us because we're still young and vibrant. Um, but yeah, like honestly, when I found myself smack dab in the middle of the world, I would like the fertility world. I was like, just tell me what I have to do. And I sat there and there was times that I was like, I don't really want to do this. I don't feel comfortable with this. And I would sit and I would talk to my husband about it. And he's like, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I don't know. So I had more conversations with my fertility nurses than I did with my actual doctor. And it was nothing against the doctor himself. I just the times that I got to be with him was very short and brief. And I was like, okay, at least I can call my fertility nurse and say, I'm not really feeling so good about this. What am I supposed to do? Um, and I didn't really know a lot of alternative things that I could do either. I was like, just come in and do this versus my secondary fertility journey. I was like, no, I have a voice and I'm not going to be jerked around. And it's thousands and thousands of dollars. And in 2014, like there was no funding. So everything was 100% out of pocket. And I think if I knew how to advocate for myself back then, I know I definitely would have done it quite differently. But I don't hold judgment against it because I still have my babies. It was what it was. And you learn, right? I really do believe in learning. And I love how you talk about advocating because I think a lot of women, especially when they find themselves in the fertility world, whether they've been trying for multiple years or they've had recurrent miscarriages or whatever has landed them in the fertility world, they're just at a point where they're like, I just tell me what I got to do so I can have a baby. Or if genetics plays into it, like age, because in the fertility world, you're considered geriatric much earlier than you are in real, like, you know, so, and I think that plays a huge piece on women too, because they're like, okay, I'm 37 or I'm 38 and I want to have a baby and I'm starting so late. I'm like, that's not late. Like that is not late at all. But you talk to a fertility doctor and they're already telling you how, you know, XYZ is already diminishing or chances are. And I think, no, like, listen, because there is so many other doctors that have different approaches or that are willing to listen to you more. But some women are just, they just like tell me what I have to do because I just want to have a baby as soon as possible. And they just listen to their doctor. So thank you very much for mentioning, like advocating and that it's okay, especially someone that is in like a clinical field. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I just want to add one more thing before we move on to something new, which is this concept of informed consent. And regardless of the clinical experience that you're looking for, and what I mean by that is somebody might be really interested in talking to a doctor who's really steeped in the research and they want to be able to recite statistics and facts and talk about it in an unemotional and blunt kind of way. That's very appealing to some personalities. There are other people who want a lot of emotional cushioning and hand holding, and they want to feel like their doctor is listening to them and hearing them. But regardless of bedside manner and the kind of experience you want in that way, there's this basic tenet of medical practice that's called informed consent. And what that means is that in order to truly consent to moving forward with a particular medical option or procedure, the person or the patient needs to be able to understand what the treatment actually is, what it involves, what the risks are, what the benefits are, and what all of the alternatives are, including doing nothing. And so if somebody is entering into and I think this happens so often in fertility and even just in our medical context in Canada, because our system is so overburdened, it's not doctors' fault that they don't have much time with their patients to truly have these conversations and make sure that they understand. So it's not that they're bad doctors, it's just the system that we exist in. But doctors don't necessarily have time to sit down and fully make sure that they have informed consent. And so I get so many people coming to me, both coaching clients and clinical patients, who are like, yeah, before I knew it, all of a sudden I was just getting this big box of medications handed to me and paying $10,000 to start this IVF process. And I don't even know or think or feel confident that this is the right decision for me. And so just to speak to that idea that if you feel like you don't have everything you need to confidently say yes to a procedure, it is your right as a patient to go back to your doctor and say, I don't understand this. I need to understand more before I can feel comfortable moving forward. That isn't you being annoying. That isn't you being overbearing. That isn't you being too emotional. That isn't you being inconvenient. That's basic medical practice 101 right there.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a great thing because I know, especially in bigger cities. So my clinic was in Toronto. It was 3 hours away from us with traffic. Um, they like every time I went in, even at 7 a.m., it was filled. And my heart just sank. Like you walk in and you think like, oh my gosh. In a sense, you feel like, okay, at least I'm not the only one. But like instantly you're just like, oh my gosh, there are so many people in here. And, like trying to juggle medical treatments and appointments and everything on top of your work schedule, or if you're going in for a second child or a second pregnancy, you're just thinking like, I have childcare. I have like, it's sometimes so overwhelming and you don't even know as a patient what you're supposed to expect. You're just like, I'm here, I'm in, I'm out, because I feel like we still live in quite a fast-paced world where we just have to go, 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 go all the time. So I think that's important that, understanding that we have consent and that if we don't feel comfortable, that we can say, hey, before I pay this $10,000 for this box of medication, can you explain a little bit more about this to me? And I think that's great advice. So is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners today?
Yeah, I would say that if I could give, one universally applicable piece of advice that I think everybody needs to hear, whether it's at the beginning of this journey or in the middle or just at the end, is that there is no right way to do this. I think a lot of people, especially the people with the eggs and the ovaries who are kind of going through doing the heavy lifting of what the procedures involve, we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves to not only do it right or do it correctly, but to do it perfectly. There's a lot of like ruminating and pressure. And I think this also comes from healthism and diet culture and influencers and people on the internet who are like giving all this advice of it worked for me, so it might work for you. And we're all kind of spending time in this huge, vast sea of infinite information and treatment plans and lifestyle practices, trying to figure out the right thing to do, because we have this thought in our mind that if I can just figure out the right foods to eat and the right exercises to do and the right meditation schedule and the right doctor and the correct medication protocol, if I can just figure it out, then I will get this baby, I'll get this particular health outcome. But the thing is that we're still at a time when there's so much that we don't know about how human bodies work and human reproduction works. We're still virtually in our infancy in terms of how we understand all of this. And so really, there is no right way to figure it out. We might know 50 years, 100 years down the road exactly how it works, and then we can definitively figure out the exact equation. But the thing is that human bodies are weird and different and inconvenient, and one cycle can be completely different than the next. And so my advice is take the pressure off yourself to figure it out and do it perfectly, because that scenario just doesn't exist.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I think I have like so many questions like going on in my head of what I want to ask you. Now, so people were dealing with surrogacy. Can you help the surrogate? And how does that, have you come across that in your clinic?
Yeah, actually, quite a bit. Living in and practicing in Toronto for so many years, I got to help such a very diverse group of people. So in my clinical practice, I would help, cisgendered heteronormative couples conceive through fertility treatments, which is amazing. I helped a lot of same-sex couples who are using reproductive technology to get pregnant just simply because they either had, two sets of testicles or two uteruses and they didn't have all the equipment that they needed to make the baby. And then there is the surrogacy context as well. And to me, there are always clinical objectives that you can look to meet, even if it's not exactly, what the conventional way of doing it is. And so again, it always comes back to that nervous system regulation and pelvic blood flow, which can help with their journey or whatever clinical objective they're looking to meet, no matter what the reason is or who they are.
Awesome. Now, say a husband and a wife came to you, is there things, because I find a lot of people that I've been having conversations with, they fall under the category of unknown. So they've done sperm tests, they've done, like they've tracked your cycle, they've done blood work and things like that, and everything seems fine, but it's just not working. Can you do treatments on like men and women? And can you do treatments kind of together that they feel like it's a inclusive kind of experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, something really interesting to observe is how much sexism there is and how much patriarchy has influenced the way we even do this.
Mhm.
And I would say that's the reason why I'd say 98% of my clinical practice is the people with the eggs and the ovaries, the intended mothers, the women that are coming in to get treatments, even if their reason for IVF is because there's an issue with the sperm. It's so interesting to observe how women and people socialized as women come into clinic and they're turning themselves inside out and backwards, trying to get exactly the right thing to do. And yet it's actually a male factor. That's the reason for, needing to do treatment or IVF or whatever. And meanwhile, the person with the sperm is not even willing to quit smoking, for example, which is a very well documented, well proven lifestyle factor that almost universally contributes to poor semen analysis parameters. And so it's interesting to observe that patriarchy in real time. But to answer your question directly, if the person with a sperm is willing to come for treatment, absolutely. Because really just working towards getting your body as healthy as possible is going to mean that you're going to have healthier systems, healthier hormones, healthier tissues and cells. And, just to really drive the point home, egg cells and sperm cells are also cells. So if we're improving the health of all the cells in your body, then those cells would be impacted as well. So just general health optimization. Again, in my clinical practice, I tend to really tread lightly with that idea because I don't like to put pressure on people to create, perfection in their body because human bodies are just never perfect. But again, working toward that, I think is never a waste of time for either one of the partners.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's incredible. Um, I can contest for myself, it was a male factor in my fertility journey. And my husband was more than willing to do anything for me. I think he researched like eating goji berries and all these things before we knew about vitamins, like specifically like sperm enhancing vitamins and all those things. But he never, in all truth, he just didn't feel comfortable. He said he would if he had to. And I was like, well, I'll take the pressure off you. Like the fact that you're willing to do something is great. And I was like, I'll do all the things for me. Cause at the end of the day, I'm the one housing the baby. And I think that was just where our mentality was. But now, like my husband, he's far more comfortable now than what he was back then, because I feel like the medical industry has changed a lot too, and just society has changed as well. But yeah, like he now he's like, of course, if you told me to go get acupuncture, I'd go do it now. That's great. So
Yeah, it's so interesting to observe, even just in the individual context of somebody's relationship, how things can change and evolve. But it's true. There's this deeply conditioned, again, patriarchal thing that happens. And again, I've seen this happen hundreds of times in clinical practice where, a woman's reaction, or the person with the eggs and ovaries, person who's socialized as a woman, gets the news that like maybe there's something up with the eggs or the uterine lining or something to do with the hormones in that picture that isn't ideal. And their immediate reaction is to be like, great, okay, cool. How can we work on this? Who can I see? Who can I ask? What kind of treatment can I do? Whereas with the person with sperm, the male factor, it's almost an identity crisis for them to have issues with the sperm. Like there's really um, this thing that, I mean, I don't personally understand because I don't have sperm or testicles, but like there's really this identity that's wrapped up. And I think that it can kind of be a bit of an existential crisis for a lot of dudes when they find out that there's something that might be up with the sperm, and it can be really hard for them. And so if you're a person who's working with male factor and that's your partner's reaction, I would always first recommend compassion. That, yeah, like dudes have a lot of their self-worth wrapped up in their swimmers, and it can be really tough. And so compassion always, understanding next, and then maybe get to work on formulating a plan. And again, I think it's important that we don't engage in all or nothing thinking. A little bit is going to be better than nothing, and we don't have to do all of it. We can make very significant changes in our medical outcomes just by making very, very small changes. So again, I see a lot of very type A perfectionist women put a lot of pressure on their male partners to also engage in this perfectionist behavior. And I don't think that that is the answer either. There's always a balance somewhere in between. So just being aware of those dynamics can change everything.
I think that's beautiful. Honestly, like it just, yeah, I could go on and on. I feel like I've got the gift of the gab. I could talk forever. But I think for any male listeners, I think it's important, like you're saying, to have that open communication, and know that there's other ways that they can help their partners too, and that it is absolutely okay. Because I know my husband, because it was a male factor for him, he was so hard on himself, and he's like, I'm so sorry that I ever had to put you through this. And I was like, there was a period of resentment, but we got over it pretty fast because again, it was a mindset piece. But him and his ex-wife had a vasectomy. They were done having children. I was not a thought in their life when that decision was made. And then boom, things happened. I came into the picture and he's like, of course I want to have babies with you. I'm like, yes, okay. And it didn't work exactly the way we planned. But he, like you're saying, he held so much guilt on himself because he's like, I'm putting you through this because of a decision that I had made in my past. And I was like, but that was your past. So don't worry about something that you did. We had it reversed. It didn't work exactly the way we thought it would either. But we're here. And the fact that he was willing to help in any way took pressure off of me. And I think it's important for listeners to hear that too, that just even if they're willing to help sometimes can relieve the pressure. And for the male listeners, that it's okay for you to do, to get treatment as well. And sometimes it's a really cool bond that you can really have with your partner as well, because you're kind of doing this together. It's not a one-sided thing. So
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that, I would say that if somebody, whether it's the person with the eggs or the person with the sperm, if you can show up to the table with your partner as you're moving through this experience and come at it with the assumption that they are just doing the best that they can, always give them the benefit of the doubt that whatever happens, they're just doing the best that they can. It really it can take that resentment out because, I mean, your husband, for example, when he had that vasectomy, of course, we can't see into the future. We're all just making the best decisions that we can with the context that we're in at the time. And we're not necessarily thinking about future repercussions. I have the same conversation with women and people with eggs and ovaries all the time as well. They feel this tremendous amount of guilt and shame for putting their career first or waiting till they met their partner later in life and maybe having babies in their late 30s or 40s. And there's all this regret and beating themselves up. And it's like, no, honey, you were just doing the best you can with the information that you had at the time. And we can't be expected to see into the future. And the key here is, again, making the assumption that your partner or yourself is just doing the best you can at the time. And also knowing that we just need to not use hindsight to beat ourselves up and go back and say, well, you made the wrong decision, because that's not going to serve anybody.
exactly. Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And I can add in the sense that like when my husband and I, when we decided to go on this journey, we very much said that we're in this together. And we very much flipped our perspective and said, you know what? We don't get to just have sex anymore. We're 100% involved. So I'm totally fine with needles, but I couldn't actually physically give myself injections because just watching it, like just something, I got squeamish doing that. So we just kept telling ourselves, like, we are so involved in this together. And that was flipping the perspective of being on a fertility journey is, you know what, find the light, find the things that can make it more enjoyable, that we're doing this together. And that is, he's far more involved than just, hey, a good romp in the sack and boom, we're pregnant. So yeah, I think it's great for listeners to know that don't let the past be part of present decisions. Be in it together, whatever, your relationship status is. Same-sex marriages, same-sex couples, just be in it together. I think that's huge and very important. And that it's okay for both people or one person, whatever works in your dynamic, to do what works best for you and take the resentment and the blame and all that out of it and just really find joy in the journey. And I think you are like an incredible asset to anyone, just because you have a very soft, beautiful voice and you're very educated. It's very nice to when you talk to someone who's very comforting and they have a soft voice, you just instantly feel at ease. And that's a really nice thing to have, especially in the fertility world, because there are quite a few doctors that are just very science focused. I met quite a few of them and I was like, can I have a squishy doctor? Like, can someone just
yes, sometimes you want a squishy person in your tribe, on your team. Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know if squishy is the right technical term, but I just wanted someone to give me a little love and not so much science, because I was like, I get the science part, but just give me a little hope. Tell me it's going to be okay. And I know no doctor can guarantee they're going to give you a baby this time or whatever, but sometimes you just want to hear it's going to be okay.
Yeah, well, I think that's one thing that a lot of acupuncturists and Chinese medicine practitioners bring to the table. I mean, we just look at the world through very different eyes than a doctor would, and we can see all of these kind of outside influences and little micro ecosystems and macro ecosystems coming together. And we are able to, and I guess I can only speak for myself, but I'm able to have the unwavering faith that no matter what happens, that my patient is going to be okay. And it might not end up looking exactly what they thought it would look like. The process might not look exactly how they thought it would. It's often a lot longer than people think it's going to be. But I know that at the end of the day, humans, especially women, are incredibly resilient. And no matter what, we're going to figure it out. And I know that for sure. And so if my patient comes in and they're not able to believe that for themselves, I can wholeheartedly believe it for both of us.
That's amazing. Is there anything else that you would add to this conversation today?
Oh, I could add a million things, but maybe we'll leave it there for now.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on here today. I know the listeners will very much get so much from this conversation. And in the podcast notes, I will link all of your bio information so that if anyone wants to contact you or reach out to you, that they can. And again, thank you so much for being on here and connecting again. This has been such a fun conversation.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
Perfect. Have a beautiful day.
You too. Thanks.
If you found this helpful or know anyone that needs to hear this, please share. And don't forget to leave a review and subscribe. In love and gratitude, Jessica.